Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the after party. I'm No White Guilt, and my partner in saving white lives is the Great Order. Appearing on the honors roll call today is Michigan Wave, Starshine Girl, The Good Girl, Daniel, and Ryan. I thank you all, and I salute your sense of moral responsibility. As for the Super Chat crown winner of last week, the crown goes to Luke and Laura, our king and queen of the week, both investing 30 anti-white repelling dollars. Congratulations, and thank you both. In second place was our very own Syrup, investing $10. Congratulations, and thank you as well, good sir. Super Chat on YouTube, or go spelunking down into the video's description for a familiar alternative. Jared and I evenly share the Super Chats with our guests here on the after party. Today, we're going to get tapped into Frodi Midjord of Scandza Forum fame. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Frodi. If you could, please introduce yourself to our audience, and then Jared, please take us into the conversation. Frodi, good sir.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys, for having me on again. I've been with you, I think, twice before. My name is Frodi. I am from Scandinavia. I run the Scandza Forum, which is a type of organization that arranges events like the Amren event and conferences and meetings and things like that. And I also run a podcast, a video or a YouTube channel called Guide to Culture, where we discuss films and culture generally. And I have been more or less involved in white nationalism. I've been a white nationalist for about 2 decades, since the late 90s. So, yeah, I think that's enough as an introduction.
Well, yes, you've been with us twice, but on After Hours, what we use as some extra episodes. The first one was right before Scandza Forum in March. We had a little preview for it to get people excited. And then because of some interesting events at Scandza, we had, most notably, of course, Jared Taylor being detained on the way. We had a conference discussion that you were part of with some of the other Scandza speakers and participants, and one attendee in the form of Liv Heide of whitedate.net fame. But we've never had you on the actual after party, which is where we really usually use the time to in-depth focus on one person, and you are that person today. So everyone, we're going to get to know Frodi better. We're very excited about this, and there's a lot of interesting topics we're going to discuss. But first, we'll ease into it with just some general history. So if you could tell us a little bit about what got you started and what you've seen change in the movement over your years, because as you said, you've been involved for some time.
Yes. Yeah, the second time I was on, that was interesting because I had an event on anarcho-tyranny, and we experienced some anarcho-tyranny in connection to that event. Namely that one of our speakers, Jared Taylor, was turned away from Europe, and he's banned from Europe for several years for thought crime. They said that he was guilty of totalitarianism when he was the victim of totalitarianism. I think that is cute. Yes, what got me started? I was born in a very small community, a tightly knit sort of ethnically homogeneous society, which is characterized, as such societies are, by no crime, absence of crime, high trust. You don't have to lock your car. You don't have to lock your door. I didn't see any, other races in reality until later.
And this was the Faroe Islands?
Yes, correct. So it's like a very small community on an island in the middle of the ocean. So it's very isolated in a way. Then I moved to a bigger town that was already affected by mass immigration and political correctness in a way that made me just feel alienated. immediately as a child even. And I never felt at home in that kind of society. And so I always had in the back of my mind the comparison between an ethnically homogeneous society and this multicultural society that I felt alienated from. And as I grew older, I became interested in politics. And as a teenager, I became interested in white nationalism and started reading up on those things. And immediately I started searching for things that I could identify with, a message that I could sort of feel was mine, and a description of society, a description of a mentality, of an ideology, of a philosophy, of a life philosophy, of a world view that I could identify with. And I found that in the older history of our people, that is, paganism, basically. I found that in older societies where we expressed our being, our identity, and our roots in a sort of untainted way, I guess. And I became fascinated by that, and I've been so ever since. And I think that is sort of what expresses really the character that can make us, that can get us away from this alienation and from this rootlessness in modern society. And since then, well, I've been involved, like I said, for some 20 years in white nationalism.
Was there a little more of that connection to old folk ways on the Faroe Islands, being that it's more isolated?
Maybe in a way. Iceland and the Faroe Islands there's a bit of sort of folksy superstition, I guess. There's a bit of connection more to roots in a way than in bigger cities, as it always is on the countryside and so on. But not in a religious sense, no. I would say that the Faroe Islands are more Christian, more sort of conservatively Christian than the rest of Scandinavia, definitely.
What about family history? Did you know, like many generations back, were you told by your parents or grandparents about your ancestors?
Yeah, there is a bit more of that because it's a small community and you just know who people are in another way, I guess. So yeah, I did felt I had a sense of belonging. I did. That maybe, in that sense, maybe disappears in bigger cities and bigger communities because you just don't know who everyone is. You become more anonymous.
I want to talk a little about that later, cities in general.
Yeah.
And if they're really Northern European. I've had some thoughts about this term civilization.
Right.
Conceiving this term civilization a bit in new ways now, because we just use this as a catch-all, civilization, as if it's just everything that's technological and modern, and it's a little more to it than that. But just for the first part of this question, since you've been involved for a couple of decades, if you'd like to pinpoint any changes and trends that you've seen in all your time doing this and developments.
Right. Yes, there have been changes. I would say most of the changes are for the better. When I went to events, well, first of all, let's take our means of communication, our ability to communicate a message to a wider audience. That basically didn't exist 20 years ago or 15 years ago, or even, to some extent 10 years ago, I guess, because you basically didn't have the internet back then. The internet existed, but it wasn't used in the same way with social media and YouTube and things like that. So you had basically mail order, and people had to actively search for this kind of information. They couldn't just stumble upon it as they do now. And that meant that the mass media hegemony was more important then than it is now. Because although that we still have big book publishing companies and big newspapers and big TV channels and so on, people search actively for alternative media now in a way they didn't do back then. And that has made our ability to reach large numbers of people much greater, so that a publication back then maybe had a few hundred readers at best, and now we have YouTube channels like your own with many thousands of followers, and I think Red Eye says like 300,000 followers. That was completely unthinkable 10 years ago, to have the ability to reach those numbers of people. And also, you know, the written media isn't as effective as the audiovisual, because we are social creatures and we interact, and we find, you know, voices and faces more relatable than we do texts. So in that way, we have gained a whole lot. And also with regard to events, when I went to events back then, was a lot of good people, of course, but also a quite large proportion of cranks, a bit weird people, because there is this phenomenon in society that when a view gets marginalized, when society tries to push a political movement to the margins, only, I wouldn't say only, but an overrepresentation of socially marginalized personality types will be attracted to a movement like that. Still, of course, because you have to pay a price if you participate in the movement, and those who are willing to pay that price are often not the typical mainstream people, because they worry about other things. So we get an overrepresentation of a bit weird personalities. That has improved a whole lot now. So I think the movement is more representative of a mainstream, and therefore more attractive to a mainstream personality type. So the movement, or I hate that word, that term, I don't like the term, because it's, you know, self-ghettoizing in a way. It's self-marginalizing. We represent the mainstream with regard to, I always like to emphasize this, that we represent what any average voter would have thought, you know, in 1985 or 1995, or for that matter, most people today, if they were honest. Because even if people pay lip service to multiculturalism and political correctness in their day-to-day lives, they don't really live that life. They don't want to live that life. So I do think we don't represent only a sort of movement. We represent people generally. Anyhow, that has improved a whole lot over these decades, very much so. We have much more, you know, normal, average, relatable people now than we had back then. And I think this is an interesting phenomenon, because that makes certain personality types, you know, Asperger types, people who are not as sensitive to social pressure, are overrepresented in movements like this. But that also means that we have a higher level of average intelligence. So it gives us some benefits, but some weaknesses as well. I think it has been said, you know, that, well, many people have noted this, that we have a certain personality type, so we communicate in a certain way that prevents us from reaching broader masses of people. And a friend of mine, he said that basically all white nationalists he encountered were INTJ personality types. I don't know if you know these 16 personality types, the Myers-Briggs. I don't even remember if that's the correct category that he talked about. But if it's one of 16 personality types that is very strong with us, then we are losing out on quite a lot of them, because we don't communicate in a way that they can relate to. And I think that's improving. That's improving a whole lot. Also the difficulty to organize, because I do think there are antisocial personality disorders and personality types that are overrepresented. And that makes it very difficult to organize, because the people who will participate in this are have a certain flavor to them. They don't want to fit in. That's why they they don't have that eagerness to fit into a group, and that's why it might be difficult to organize, and conflicts arise and things like that, because of psychological reasons.
And yet you are an organizer yourself. So on this bit of introductory biography, most know you as the organizer of Scandza, of course, which is a preeminent forum in the Scandinavian countries. So if you could tell us a little just about what started you there, and also in the broader context Obviously, we have people listening all over the world. We have a wonderful European audience, but especially for us Americans, whatever you'd like to share about specifically what the European scene has been like recently, what the pulse is there, the feeling is there, particularly, of course, your area of the world you know the best, Scandinavia.
Right. What got Scandza Forum started? I founded it in early 2017, and we've had several conferences so far. I even did some conferences before that. They were not the Scandza Forum, but they were sort of precursors, I guess. We operate in 3 countries. We operate all over Scandinavia. So we operate in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Those countries are very tightly connected, their destinies, I would say, and their cultures, their languages, their mythology, everything is very, very deeply connected there. So that's why I think that it would be difficult for one of those countries to run off on their own and do good things and leave the others behind, because they're very much affected by each other. And the Scandza Forum is a platform where I want to discuss bring white nationalism to the table, basically, with intellectuals and good debaters from around the world. We've had, Kevin McDonald, Jared Taylor several times, and Greg Johnson every time. Millennial Woes. We've had Mike Enoch. We've had the Golden One. We've had a good list of speakers.
Mark Collette recently.
Mark Collette. Yeah. His speech got a standing ovation, very deservedly so, and his speech was very popular. We had Martin Lischmetz back then as well. We've had a good list of speakers, and the main purpose is to give people an opportunity to socialize, to interact with each other, because I believe that ideas and intellectual content is not enough to motivate people, because people are first and foremost social creatures rather than just rational, logical creatures. You can't just feed information into a computer and get a result in behavior and how they act politically. You have to give them the opportunity to act in a social context. What I mean by that is that when our detractors, when our opponents, when the people who hold power now, when we do things they disagree with, or when we say things they disagree with, they don't really present too many arguments to show us why we are wrong. They don't give us facts to disprove what we are presenting. Instead, they try to socially isolate us. They try to make us persona non grata in our own societies. They try to prevent us from holding jobs. They try to make us present us and smear us in mass media as unlikable people. And people can think that, that's not so bad, but it is. It has led to several suicides. It's led to people losing their jobs because employers get pressured as well into firing employees who are white nationalists. Recently, a friend of mine, Cyan, who lives in America, in the northern parts of the United States, she was doxxed by Antifa people in her community. And her family has been harassed since then. They put up flyers in her neighborhood. They contacted all of her neighbors and to pressure them into becoming hostile, basically, against them, against this family. Her child, 8-year-old daughter, was harassed. They called her company where she works, where she was a very valuable employee and well liked by colleagues and bosses and everything. She did a great job, but they basically pressured the company into firing her. So she lost her job. And a gun club, I think the John Brown Gun Society or something like that, an Antifa gun club decided to have, they announced that they were going to have a torchlit rally outside of their house. Very much like, the famed Ku Klux Klan cross burnings and so on, but this is, of course, legitimate. Anyhow, she told me today that she talked to, this very morning actually, she told me that she talked to the judge. And these people, this gun club, the leaders of this gun club, they have lost their guns. The police has taken their guns from them. So that is very good news, and some of those people might lose their jobs because these Antifa people have been harassing this family. I mean, that's just one example, but it's a good friend of mine, and I mean, she's just a family provider and a mother, and she's been harassed. She's lost her job. They've lost basically everything. They've been really harassed by these people, intimidating them. And she told me that even, you know, her daughter was afraid because this armed guy is like, he's staring at her 8-year-old daughter. And that's the way these people try to intimidate us into being quiet. They try to shut us up that way. They don't present arguments. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's extremely important for us to build communities. Because in situations like that, it doesn't matter how good arguments you have. You need people around you to support you. And she has that. But I think, you know, I think we have to think in those terms. Was there a second part to that question? I went off on the reason behind the Scandza forum.
Yes, I was just giving Jason a moment. I think he was about to come in, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But hello, Jason.
Sure.
Hey, I was just going to say the anti-whites are really what they resort to now, since they've lost the debate of ideas, of fairness, of legality, since they've lost the debate on every single level. All that's really left to them are several different types of terrorism, which you have this psychological terrorism, which are an example of that is showing up at the house with torches. That's also a bit of a crossover into the social terrorism, where they contact family members, they contact community groups you belong to, and they tell them that you're evil and therefore they're evil. You're a heretic and therefore they are heretics if they don't get rid of you. You have the economic terrorism, where they go after your job, they get you fired. And of course, as I've said before, it isn't the job that we want. It's the things that we buy, the things that we purchase and need with the money that we get from the job. So when an anti-white gets you fired from a job, or gets one of us fired from a job, what they're really doing is depriving you of the medicine you need, of the food you need, the medicine that you would buy for your children, the rent you would, or mortgage you would pay, the car payments that you would make. That's really what they are preventing by getting one of us fired from our jobs. And then, of course, you have the physical terrorism, which is the attacks, the physical attacks, the hitting you in the head with a bike lock, and then the professor only getting arrested because some people in the white positive sphere do all of the legwork for the police, and then they end up, as I understand, dropping this case against this anti-white professor later on, after they are really forced by the public to charge them. So that is something that speaks volumes. And for the average white person with the average white sensibilities, the working class white person, when they observe this, but the important thing is that they have to know it's happening. And that's why us reporting on these things, talking about these things, bringing them this information, that's why all of that is so important. Because if these people are not hearing this information, then for them, it doesn't exist. For them, all that is the real world is the anti-white narrative that they watch on their televisions, that they see in the movies, they read in the newspapers, etc. That for them then is the real world, even when they know and they're consuming it as fiction, and they know it's fiction. They can tell you it's fiction. The mind cannot tell the difference. The subconscious mind cannot tell the difference. And that's what they end up living by, are the things that they learn without critical examination during periods of entertainment. So it is important for us to reach out to these people. One other thing that Frodi said that I wanted to speak to was, early on we had this crank issue, and we did for a great many years. And in fact, there were a lot of debates in the States about, do we allow the cranks to participate because it expands the numbers and makes it look like there are more of us here than there are not, or do we turn them away and have a smaller but legitimate crew of people? I argued on the side of turn them away, because I organized different groups over the years, headed different chapters, and the cranks were always an issue. So if you out there, as we move toward, this is also a lesson to be learned for people who are going to beginning to create little groups, little clubs that go beyond our discussions here on the internet, is that if you have someone show up or one or more who show up and they're not quite right. They're not really into white well-being. They're just rejected by society and they want somebody to talk to. If such a person shows up, and you'll be able to tell, there'll be no doubt about this. Invite them to leave. Invite them to not participate in what you're doing in as kind as you can be, because you do not want them present. We need people that are clubbable, that can get along with others. We need people that, remember, you and the other people in your group are the message. A large part of what we deliver to folks is the way you talk, the way you communicate, how you look. And if you have someone there that is shoddily dressed, shirt untucked, they want to talk about wild things like lizard people potentially controlling governments or what have you, just ask them to leave. They're only going to harm what we are trying to do. And what we're trying to do is draw the best to us. People like the physicist Dr. William Pierce, who headed the National Alliance, talked adamantly about this. And it was really his position that I took up many years ago in rejecting the cranks that would show up to our meetings. Because if we have people who are, now remember, this doesn't mean, this is very important that everybody understand this, and I'll just speak to it for one more moment, is that it doesn't mean you need to have expensive clothing. It doesn't mean that you have to have graduated from a prestigious university. It doesn't mean that you have to have a certain type of job. You have to be white. It doesn't mean any of that. What it means is that you clean yourself up when you go out into public. You act with morally and ethically. You are of sound mind. You are patient in dealing with others. The same way that you would dress when you take yourself to church on the Sunday, you're going to press your clothes or what have you. Those are the kind of folks we want the public to see, because those are the kind of folks that normal white people with normal sensibilities are drawn to, and will bring in more and more of our community's best. And one of those people who is one of our community's best that I want to, just for a brief moment, spotlight here today is our great and intrepid, absolutely implacable champion of white well-being, and that is Syrup, our moderator. We see a lot of people who come to the cause, and some of them are just consumers, and that's fine if that's all that they can be. If that's where they are mentally, that's where they are economically, that's where they are in their social situation. They can't be anything more than a consumer. We need doers, though. We need people who are going to get out there and contribute their time, contribute their money, contribute their talents, their education, intelligence, etc., to the cause of white well-being, if we are going to be able to recapture our destiny. And one of the reasons why we want to mention Syrup today, it goes beyond just the fact that he does so much. He comes out day after day and moderates the chat, very often dealing with people who are intending ill will. There are people who want to show up, and what we want to prevent is Gresham's law that in the economy is that bad money will chase out good money. And when it comes to the chat, bad comments will chase out good comments. Bad discussion will chase away good people. So the moderators are extremely important, the job that they do. Syrup does this job for numerous channels, and he's also engaged in other activities for white well-being. And for that, we honor and salute him. And we are also mentioning him today because Syrup and his family has recently suffered a loss. And that is, Syrup's father has recently, in the past couple of weeks, has passed away. And even though his good father, a man for whom he loved, a man who obviously did a magnificent job, a heroic man, because we see that heroism and that investment that he gave to Syrup manifesting in that young man as he serves the cause for white well-being. The only cause that can justify a human life is the cause from which we come. And we see that this Papa Syrup did a magnificent job when it came to Syrup. Papa Syrup was even 60 years of age when he produced the young man that is with us today. Syrup has continued to come out show after show, despite losing his father, with, as they say in the UK, a stiff upper lip. And we honor him for that. And the whole community of white well-being remembers and condoles with Syrup and his father. And we, in essence, remember Papa Syrup today with this episode. and the great Frodi talking about growing our community even larger so that we can bring more people like Syrup in the years to come, more people like Papa Syrup in the coming future. So I will pass it back. Thank you very much, Syrup, for being with us and for standing tall. If everybody could show Syrup a bit of love in the chat today, we would greatly appreciate it.
Yes, indeed. Today's show is dedicated to Syrup's father and his memory.
My condolences. Can I add one thing to that? I have one good example with regards to, keeping away, people who we don't want to have, basically. Because a typical beginner mistake is to believe that one more person is always better. Because when you start something, you're desperate for people, and one more person it's always better to have one more person. One group that was started quite not too long ago, I think like 3 years ago, is the Erkenbrand group in the Netherlands. I went to visit them a few months ago this fall, and they had 0 weirdos. And I congratulated them on the fact that they had kept away, they've had 0 tolerance for that. Because the fact is that one weirdo makes 10 good people uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Because, let's face it, I mean, we can think on an abstract level that people shouldn't care about them, they should stick together no matter. But in reality, socially savvy, socially intelligent people want to be around other socially intelligent people. And if we have too many weirdos, those people who we really need and who are relatable to our greater community, they don't want to be a part of what we do. So I think that's good advice.
Yes, and that's Erkenbrand based in the Netherlands, correct?
Yes.
All right, so we'll get to that second part of that question, which was just if you would like to give us a little lay of the land about Europe, the European scene, and specifically Scandinavia. Just anything brief you'd like to tell us, especially here in America.
Yes, certainly. Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. There are interesting things happening. Sweden has probably the longest history of a explicitly white nationalists movement in a way. So Sweden is the strongest in that regard. Norway doesn't really have that. It basically has no movement. It doesn't have any strong national populist parties, political parties, populist parties. But that is also connected. It has different reasons. There are different reasons for that. One reason is that the Norwegian society is just differently organized. I mean, the Norwegians have been a rural people for a longer time. They didn't move into the sort of city life. They are more based on the farmer society, valley people. Norway is made up of huge mountains, so they lived in valleys and were more socially isolated, which made these smaller communities more tightly knit, and there's a stronger social control in a way, so that people don't want to break out of the political middle ground, because people are extremely afraid of being socially ostracized in a way and saying the wrong things. Also, they haven't been as badly affected by mass immigration as Sweden has. So the problems are newer there. So I think we can expect, over the coming years, that things will start happening there in terms of reaction against these types of problems. And also, Norway was occupied by the Germans during the Second World War, and they have really created it's sort of the national creation myth, I guess, of that country, because Norway became a country quite recently, an independent country quite recently, and that was the first big event. Their first big event was that they were occupied by the Germans during the Second World War, and the Social Democrats after that created a sort of national mythology that this was a very tyrannical occupation, which in reality, you had maybe 20% were very pro-German, 20% that were very anti-German, and the vast majority that were largely indifferent, politically speaking. So that is sort of created after the fact, but that still is the sort of the national mythology of Norway. Denmark is, I would say, the most interesting Scandinavian country right now. Denmark has a more liberal mindset, in not an American sense. In Europe, liberal means open-minded. In America, I guess it means more, leftist, leftist leaning, and more leftist tyrannical almost. In Europe, it still has the older meaning of being politically open-minded. So the Danish people are more opposed to this extreme sectarian social control. They want an open debate. So you're actually able to talk about these issues in Denmark still. And the interesting thing is that they have an upcoming in a couple of weeks, they have an election in Denmark. And 3 different national populist parties have a good chance of getting into parliament. There is one which is already in, and it's a big party that is, slightly national populist, but still much more radical than anything in Sweden, basically, that has any chance of any influence. And then we have, what's going on here? There's some sort of disturbance on the line.
We can see you okay.
A disturbance in the force.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Anyhow, okay, yeah, it disappeared. Right. But there are 2 new parties that are getting into parliament, quite likely in Denmark: Nye Borgerlige and Stram Kurs, which is very radically opposed to mass immigration. There is one guy, Rasmus Paludan, who is a party leader for one of these parties, and he participates in the debates, and he basically says explicitly that not only does he want to stop this mass immigration, he wants to throw out all of the Muslims out of the country, and he has gotten a huge support for that. So there are different mentalities in the Scandinavian countries because of different, historical outlines. But I want to follow Denmark very closely now, and I'm very interested and impressed with what is going on there. And it is Denmark, of the 3, is probably the country that is more, mentally healthy in ways of dealing with these issues, because the others are sectarian. They just want to oppress you and shut you up if you talk about this. Denmark still believes in an open debate. They're, be human about it. Even if you're politically correct, you don't really want to silence people in the same way that the Swedes and Norwegians have, and they even joke about the Swedes, being so sectarian about their political correctness.
I recently saw a headline, and it was actually a female Danish politician saying something to the effect of, Denmark has to be prepared to not be as close with Sweden if Sweden, in fact, continues to go overboard with what they're doing. They fear that the Islamization of Sweden, they don't want it trickling down literally across that bridge now. I think the bridge, right, that connects Denmark and Sweden. They don't want it trickling down.
Yes, there is. And they joke about it, and they're open about it, and they even have these legal decisions saying that Danish communities have to be majority Danish. They have to be dominated by ethnic Danes. It's not even civic nationalism in that regard. So I have high hopes for things, going in the right direction there. Sweden has the Sweden Democrats that are basically watering down their own message so that they are making themselves irrelevant. I don't have very high hopes for the Sweden Democrats, but on the other hand, the more radical nationalist movement is much stronger in Sweden. It isn't very much in existence in Denmark in the same way. Denmark has some groups, but not at all in the same way as Sweden. Norway, like I said, is there is no resistance there yet, but Probably it's because the problems are a bit younger, a bit more recent, and because of different parts about Norwegian history.
What you said a moment ago, were you essentially saying that Denmark has a stronger push against this in its political parties, but it doesn't have on the ground movements the way Sweden does? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking in terms of what in the 90s was a skinhead movement, basically, what the more subculture, what we have called now the alt-right, and you know, meta-political movements that talk about politics in a very sort of in a very grounded way, that are not involved in political parties, perhaps, but take the intellectual debates and talk about the issues in a more radical sense. You know, people who are connected to white nationalism. White nationalism, in a explicit white nationalism, isn't really a big thing in Denmark, but national populism, you know, these political parties talking about it in the political mainstream, that has a stronger presence in Denmark. I think because Denmark has a more healthy national mentality. It has a self-image of being a country where you can talk about things, and Denmark is more laid back, you know. And it's like it doesn't go so far in the extremes. It's laid back. You can talk. You can talk about these things in a different way than you can in Sweden. I mean, these are all differences in degree and not differences in kind, I guess. But definitely, you can make a scale like that in Scandinavia.
Interesting. We have a couple super chats. We have Joshua Randall super chatting by way of the familiar alternative. Thank you very much, Joshua. Super chatting with $10. And writing, my wife was saying she would like a no white guilt dress. Any chance you will add a no white guilt dress to the NWG shop? Maybe. I haven't had that request before, but that would be interesting. Maybe I can get one of the trad ladies who is making dresses and work with one of them, and we could get something very stylish for our fans out there who would like a no white guilt dress. We also have Lawrence Anderson super chatting with $1.99. Thank you very much for your contribution. Courage and positivity are what we need right now. Well, that's what we have over here in the service to white well-being. Everyone else in the white positive sphere can go through these sickening roller coaster rides of white pilled, black pilled, white pilled, black pilled. No. We're getting to work on the things that are in front of us. Something we mentioned yesterday on PWR, I spoke briefly to, is that this idea that we answer questions and talk about questions over which we have no control, no power. There's no hope in hell of addressing those issues anytime soon. It's like the guy who's standing in front of you and says, we're going to have that Shangri-La, but just as soon as we get behind this or over this thing that's behind me, and you look over his shoulder and it's Mount Everest that's over his shoulder. We have to be pragmatic. And when you are pragmatic, you don't go through these ups and downs of hope and then total abject loss of hope. You instead focus on what you can do, putting one foot in front of the other. That is exactly what Frodi is talking about doing. That is exactly what he is living with all of his activities for white well-being. He is saying, what can I do right now with what's immediately in front of me? Can I put together a meeting here? Can I reach these people there? What are the people like over in this country? What are they like in that country? How can I craft messages for them? That is what we need to be doing in the sphere, or in the cause for white well-being. The entire sphere should do it, but that is what we, in the cause for white well-being, that's what we do. We don't concern ourselves with what some future economy is going to look like or what some future government could potentially look like. This is all nonsense. It's an entire waste of time. And when you begin to fantasize about such things, your mind then wanders off about, how do I achieve them? Well, you can't. You can't imagine, or you can't achieve a specific government, or you can't achieve a specific economy or a specific setup of a community if you haven't first addressed the Mount Everest that's in front of you, the challenges that are here right now that we can deal with and we can be successful with. And that comes down to doing a lot of things. That comes down to things like being here in the chat and empowering yourself with the meme curatives that we learn when we're going free, and then taking those out to friends, family, and strangers and using those. It means making flyers. It means getting together with friends and getting clubs for white well-being together, and then reaching out to more people from those clubs, doing what Frodi is doing. This is what Frodi looks like right now. It's like I said the same thing about Mike from Australia with his work for South Africa. Frodi is our hero. He is what our heroes look like. Stop looking for some guy who is either like a peacock adorned with as many degrees and doctorates, etc., as you can find at a university. Stop looking for some guy that is going to literally wield a sword out in the streets. This is what heroism looks like today. It takes far more courage to sit down at your family's get-together and talk about white well-being. It takes far more courage to go out into the street and talk to strangers and try to bring more people to this cause. It takes far more courage to do those things than it does to be courageous and fantasize. That is not being courageous. Fantasizing about some tomorrow is not being courageous. So thank you very much for that, Lawrence, for that super chat. We appreciate it. We also had a question that has been recurring throughout the chat, and I don't know how much of an issue this is. Apparently, a lot of people think it's an issue, and they would like Frodi to give his 2 cents on it before we move forward, and that is this whole idea about the Swedish government and the runes and the potential of action being taken against the runes being defined as hate symbols. I will quickly say, as a preface to what Frodi is going to say, that the anti-whites throughout Western civilization, and this is, and Frodi actually mentioned something where we get a little bit of a hiccup between different countries, is somebody, what does liberal mean in this country and liberal in that country? It really will just be simplified if we just refer to them as the anti-whites. Everybody else, and I talk about this in the 2nd edition of Go Free, they can refer to them as NPCs or specifically vagues. You don't know where they lie. And then there are those like us who are serving white well-being. So when it comes to these things, these symbols, it doesn't matter what the symbol is. It could be something you scribble on a piece of paper. It could be something that was carved into a rock by our ancestors many thousands of years ago. If it is ever used as a symbol for white well-being, the anti-whites will demonize it, and they will liken it with all things demonic, all things that are white and fair-featured. And this is the new face of the devil now. The devil is not red-skinned and cloven-footed with horns. The devil now is a white guy with a sharp jawline and light features. That's the devil now in the anti-white narrative. So if you are a white guy and you look like that, you're the devil. And then we have stages of demons that circulate around that. I mean, if you're a white guy that's lucky enough to be entirely dark featured, you have been given a little bit less hatred in the media and the anti-white narrative than the light featured guys. But nonetheless, you are part of that same community and demonized. So with our looks, with our symbology, it is all going to be demonized by the anti-white. So if not today in Sweden, do they demonize, do they ban the Thor's hammer or what have you, or this runic alphabet? If not today, then at some point in the future. And your question is it a good thing? Is it a terrible thing? It is a fantastic thing, something we can be white-pilled about, because as the anti-whites continue to overreach the things that they are with their anti-whiteism, as they continue to overreach and it becomes increasingly Stasi-like and tyranny-like, more of our brothers and sisters, millions more, not a handful more, not a dozen more, but millions more will be disgusted in the broad middle class of white people with normal sensibilities. So, Frodi, from your seat in Scandinavia, what is it looking like as far as the longevity of our runic alphabet, other symbols that we have? How many things have they, maybe, I think folks would also like to know, in that part of the world, that part of the Western world, what have they anti-whites already moved against? What is already banned? And what is then coming close or nearing that chopping block? Is it going to be Thor's hammer next?
Yeah, I think you're in on a very important topic there, because we have to bear in mind that these people, the leading people behind these anti-white policies, they want our genocide. They want us dead, basically. And everything that gives us a sense of belonging and roots is a threat to that. I talked to Ramsey Paul earlier today and a few hours ago, and he told me about some new decision in New Zealand that they banned the expression "it's okay to be white." That's apparently illegal. I haven't read about it myself. I can't give you the details. He told me about it, and I mean, I have different periods in my time when I block out the media because I can't handle too much clown world or I'll go insane. And this whole thing about the runes and the futark and the hammer being banned, as far as I've heard, it's not a real decision. It's a suggestion, or it's an idea from some person. I don't know what person. I don't think it's gonna happen. Laws in Sweden, generally speaking, are very much context driven. Like if you say something, it can be illegal in one context and not illegal in another context. That can be okay. So I think it's difficult to say exactly what symbols are banned because it differs from how and where they are used. So I can't really give you a list of these symbols are illegal. There was even an acquaintance of mine many years ago. He said in a speech, he exclaimed in Swedish, though, that we need to signal to these people that blah 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 something, and he was convicted for hate crime because he made this joke, and and they said, well, it's obvious that he meant sig something else. And he made it as a joke to make a point, but he was thrown in prison for incitement of hatred. So my point is that depending on context, anything can be illegal, I guess, in Sweden. So it's very much open to interpretation.
It should be a real eye-opener in New Zealand if that's the case, and perhaps somebody in the chat can fill us in if they can have a quick look and see if
I'm wrong about that, I apologize. But that's what came up in our conversation, that apparently it's okay to be white.
And it is true to Jason's point that it reveals their hand more, just like Jason's terms that he has given us, like white well-being. Anyone that is pushing against that, well, you're basically saying you're for white ill-being. Mm-hmm. Or in this case, it's not okay to be white. It's not okay to take pride in your heritage. Funny enough, as you two gentlemen are having this conversation, speaking of folk, I'm remembering I just had the honor of having my third article published on Countercurrents, and I was going to go share my review of the Uberfolk album, which, of course, our friend Philosophicat is a big part of. And I went to Countercurrents, and it's down, and I thought maybe it's my browser, and I asked Syrup to share, and Syrup's over in the UK, and Syrup is not accessing Countercurrents either. So Countercurrents might be encountering a little difficulty at the moment. Now we'll have to keep an eye on that as well. Some breaking news as we're on the air. But seeing as how the time is flying and we're already wrapping up the first hour, Frodi, you were beginning to talk about politics and the scene in Scandinavia. And you also said earlier that you feel, and we all know this, that many people most probably feel the way we do, but they're too scared and they're conditioned to not speak about this. So this is all a great setup to speak now about something that's very near and dear to you. And you've coined this term, will to politics, something you spoke about in a speech that's on, if Syrup, you could go find this, it's on Frodi's channel. And it was in Kiev, I believe, in the Ukraine. Is that correct, the speech you gave there? Why don't you tell us a little bit about this will to politics conception, because that's going to open the door for us to talk about a lot of things.
Right. The speech was in Estonia, in Tallinn.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah.
I thought I said something about Kiev, but maybe maybe I'm confusing things in my head.
Yeah. Well, it's Eastern Europe. Well, I don't think the Estonians want to be called Eastern Europe.
No. Have you been to anywhere in Kiev? There's someone posted a video saying you were in Kiev.
Yes, I gave a speech about Nordic religion in Kiev. Yes.
Okay.
This
Maybe I'm just
speech wasn't.
confusing the videos in my head. So anyway,
Yeah.
this was in Tallinn. Please go on.
This was in Tallinn. Yeah, I coined the term will to politics based on Nietzsche's term will to power. And it's basically the motivation to change the world around you, to what Nietzsche called will to power was basically the driving force to overcome obstacles and through creativity change the world around you. Art is probably the sort of supreme example of will to power, but also, you know, grand politics, I guess. If you create an empire, I guess that's also an example of will to power. I mean, you have an image, you have an idea of something, and you materialize it in the outer world. You overcome all the difficulties and hurdles in the way of doing that. I coined the term because there is sickness in the right, I guess, in a more general sense, in conservatism, that is hopefully not present in white nationalism or, you know, the alt-right or whatever you want to call it. I just call it white nationalism. The struggle for white well-being, as you guys call it, and that is the willingness to ask for permission, ask your opponents, enemies for permission for everything you do, basically, because they set the rules for the game. And if you don't have the hunger and the willingness to go into politics, to fight, and to actually have a vision to fight for in politics, you're not going to win. And that has been very much lacking in the sort of more conservative, in the more conservative sphere, I guess, and that's the difference between white nationalism and conservatism in terms of mentality. I guess there's a lot of, you know, good and sound, healthy stuff in conservatism as a theory, you know, or in Edmund Burke's theories or anything like that. But conservatism and the sort of in America, you associate it with Republicans, I guess. That mentality is they don't fight for a goal. They fight to prevent something. They fight to what are the words I'm looking for here? Sorry, this is my third podcast today, so I'm sort of
speak several languages, which Jason and I cannot say ourselves. So we respect a lot how good a communicator you are in English. What other languages do you speak?
Well, I don't speak so many languages. It's just the Scandinavian languages and Faroese and
I think Frodi, I think what you're trying to say is that typically when it comes to conservatives, they are always on the defensive. They're trying to prevent the loss of something rather than gain something, rather than be victorious. They're just fighting against the losses. They're trying to slow down the losses.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are many ways you can put this. They're fighting to not lose. They're not fighting to win. They're fighting to save face, you know, and they're fighting to lose with dignity. At least I did. I protested against this, but I want to be a respectable person. You know, so I mean, that's the gist of what I was going at in that speech, and what has been lacking, because I think in big general terms, politics is not about this or that little tiny issue, or that this or that little theory. It's about masses of, I mean, this might sound a bit woo-woo, I guess, but in what direction does the mass of energy go? I think it's about you know, it's when political mass movements arise, people are caught up in a storm, in a political storm that captures their minds and their souls. And if we want to create that, we have to have the conviction to not be apologetic or permission-seeking with regard to our opponents. We have to be not only courageous, but we have to be a bit arrogant, I guess. a bit flippant towards their. We can't. You know, the fascists had a saying called "me ne frego," which basically means "I don't give a damn." It was basically a sort of. The meaning is not in the meaning of the words. The spirit is not in the meaning of those words, but it's the attitudes of the words, and that's basically a fighting call that I don't care. It's like I'm gonna do what I believe in, and I think that's the attitude I was talking about. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what context I wrote that speech, but it's basically there is a tendency in the right to be too nice, too defensive, and not aggressive enough.
You did something in the speech about would a leftist accept being questioned about his politics at work? No, they would gather lawyers and they would raise a stink. And we think sometimes, not us, maybe I shouldn't use the word we, but the conservatives that you're speaking about, you were saying something to the effect of they expect that perhaps our enemies will one day say, "Oh, you've suffered enough."
Yeah, right.
Take pity, and that will never happen.
No.
There's no retreat and no surrender, and we need to have that mentality.
Yeah, I guess I should have read my speech again before we talked because I
did
I've sort of forgotten what I said in a sort of a spirit of inspiration. Yeah, the context of that was a person that I know who lost his job, and this basically was called into interrogation, and it's like he started out by wanting to be nice and sort of, I want to get along with the people here. I don't want to be an asshole, you know. I don't want to be. I don't want to be that person. I want to be liked by my colleagues, and we have that drive. But the thing is, George Lincoln Rockwell, he had a saying that he had more respect for a communist than a conservative, because a communist will go to the electric chair for what he believes in, and a conservative will back off if he's called a racist. You know, it's like, how much do you believe in what you're saying and what you're doing? Because that will determine how much everyone else will listen to you and how much they will go along. Because if you don't have the conviction, it's like when people talk about, and this is a problem with, you know, I like many things about the new movement of the alt-right and the meme culture and the forum culture and the jokes and the memes and everything and the Pepe and everything like that. But when it becomes anonymous and when it becomes a joke, it's not something that people talk about in their private lives. It becomes an internet persona in a way. If you get what I mean. And the thing is that there is a problem if we start talking about these issues as if they are like a dirty joke. You know, it's like we have to whisper a bit about these things, and that gives off the wrong energy. And the gist of my point is more about an attitude that we need to embody, and we need to embody a pride in the fact that what we say is self-evident. It's just right, and it's not something that is, you know, we're called right-wing extremists just randomly. Right-wing extreme. We aren't extreme. You know, 99% of whatever I believe in was completely mainstream 15, 20 years ago for most people. I mean, take homosexual marriage, for example. That was inconceivable in the 80s, at least, you know, where I've lived. But now it's inconceivable to disagree with it. Things change extremely rapidly. And from a historical perspective, we are just mainstream normal people who are not afraid to speak out about these issues. So I don't think we should accept those epithets as extremists, because we aren't. We are common sense people in many ways, in most ways, and basically all.
I have a meme, MC, and a meme curative when people can use when they're faced with this. They can reject the label, or they can say of extremist, or they can say extremism is a virtue when it protects the innocent. and have the anti-white then get back on their heels and have to defend their argument, their position by saying, oh no, it's extreme is not good when you're protecting the innocent because and then they lose. So that's you could use the same thing when they say, oh, you're angry, you just have anger in you, or if they call you a hater. Now if they call you a hater, and this material is in the second edition of Go Free, so it's going to be available for everyone. We're going to empower every single person in the service to white well-being, so we can all just bring our white brothers and sisters to this cause, to this noble cause, and turn back the anti-whites, make a joke of them in every conversation. But when they use hate, for example, do not embrace, my admonition is, do not embrace hate. Use the word anger instead, because hate now has been conflated with a great many things that are beyond the word hate. You know, it's sort of like embracing that you are a racist, for example. Don't ever do that. You just call the person anti-white in that case. But if they say hate, or if they say anger, you just turn it back to anger, and you say that anger is a virtue when it is used to protect the innocent. And there is nothing an anti-white can say in response to that that is legitimate, that the average person will find an acceptable argument. But we'll get Frodi and Jared's thoughts on that right after I read these super chats. We have Syrup, our great and intrepid moderator, Syrup, super chatting with 10 pounds. Thank you very much, my good friend. Writing, Jason's made some great points comparing red pilling to sales. Not everyone is a potential buyer, especially in clown world. Not even old friends, but there are many others who are responsive. Find those people. Indeed, and I'll just underscore that. In sales, the most important thing that you can possibly know is whether or not your prospect is going to buy your product. If there's no way in hell your prospect is going to buy, don't spend another second on that person. Move on to the next one. If the person is vehemently anti-white that you're speaking with, say, have a nice day, you anti-white scumbag, and then get to the next white person who will be receptive, who will be amenable to the well-being of our people. If you descend into an argument, the only time, let me rephrase this, the only time you have an argument with such a person is when you have an audience that can learn from it. An audience that can then say, wow, this guy or this woman who's talking about white well-being is making a lot of sense, and this anti-white over here is sounding really evil and immoral. Just like we had a couple of weeks ago, we had a student mention that in a conversation with his professor, he was able to get the professor during class in front of all the students to say that the professor was anti-white. If you can get your professor or the interlocutor, the person you're debating with, what have you, to own up to being anti-white, you have absolutely won on every single level in the eyes of that audience. The only people in that audience that will still reject you are sick anti-whites that cannot be brought to truth and the well-being of white people. So thank you very much for that, Syrup. That great comment and that super chat. We also have Luke, our great friend of the show, and last week, and I think the week before, and maybe even the week before, his crown winner, super chatting $30 by way of the familiar alternative. Thank you very much for that kind investment to white well-being and writing. This donation is in memory of Syrup's father. My heart goes out to you and your family, Syrup, with much gratitude. Thank you for your kindness and work here. Hail Syrup and his father. Thank you very much for that kind donation in the name of Syrup's father, Luke. I absolutely would not expect anything less from you. We have just had a super chat come in. Pinoid News, super chatting $2. You do know women's rights caused all this, right? As what he wrote. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. There are many connections to rapid changes in our countries as soon as women were given the right to vote. There's no denying that. Evidence of history. Shortly after the women were given the right to vote in Western countries, we inherited these feminist mothering nanny tyranny state that took over many aspects of our lives and continues to expand, so that the conversation has gone from one about the future and destiny and well-being of our entire people, and has become narrowly focused on the well-being of the next brown babies that show up on our borders. So we also have a super chat, and this I will toss out. to Frodi and Jared. The question here by Patrick Henry, super chatting with $2 and writing, do you see MGTOW as a problem for our people? I do. I will pass that over to Frodi and anything else he would like to add from anything I have just said, and Jared, and then we will get back on track with these questions we have with our great leader in the cause, Frodi. I pass it over to you, brother.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an important thing that you brought up about before I answer this question, the fact that you can't really save everyone, because that's another. You asked me earlier, some lessons from my time in this whole thing, and one of the lessons is that maybe in the beginning you're very enthusiastic and you think you can save the world, basically, but it's like trying to save an alcoholic who doesn't admit that he is an alcoholic and doesn't want to stop being an alcoholic. Well, there's nothing you can do. And I think the healthier thing is to sort of realize that we're not going to save everyone, because that's just not in the realm of the possible. The best thing we can do is to build a good platform for the people who want to come to us. And I think we have to have there's a difference between pursuing and attracting. We have to stop sort of chasing after people. We have to attract them to us. We present something and people come to us if they want. And the best thing we can do is to build a good platform for them to come onto and be a part of our community that way. MGTOW, I don't really know too much about it, I have to say. Is it a good thing? Well, of course not. I mean, it's a sign of social sickness, of course. If men and women are the two components that are needed for the coming generations. We don't have families anymore. I mean, all of this is a huge problem. Of course, MGTOW isn't a positive sign. It's a sign of the deep sickness of our times, that men feel that they don't want to have anything to do with women because they don't understand women and they don't know how to interact with women. It's a huge problem. And I mean, one of the big reasons behind that is that families fall apart. And if men grow up without a father to guide them how to interact with women, they're not going to be very successful with women, I guess, because I mean, even a well-meaning mother does not understand the same way and cannot teach her son the same way how to behave towards women, because women have a tendency to say that they want one thing. They have a sort of a certain self-image in their heads about how they are and what they like and what kind of men they're attracted to. But what they actually do is probably a bit different from that. The same thing with men, of course. So I do think that is a huge problem, that, families fall apart and young men growing up don't really have guidance on how to interact with women. And that leads them to these weird movements like the MGTOW and other stuff. So no, it's not a good thing. And it's probably the most important problem for us to solve is how to get, families to work again, how to get people starting families again.
Yes. Well, quickly, I was actually, when that super chat came in, I missed that for a moment. I was reading, I have an email I'll just briefly mention from a concerned member of the public who's a regular listener to TAP and newly crowned Power, PWR, over on Mark Collette's channel, and a supporter as well. If you know who you are, I appreciate. And he actually sent in to UK police a formal complaint about that Burger King tweet. We were talking about this last week, so I thought that you guys would find that amusing. He sent me an image of this whole letter he sent in. It's all very professionally done. He gives the Burger King UK headquarters in Liverpool, and he quotes the tweet. He has an image of the tweet in this letter that he sent to the police in the UK, and he said, among other things, given the reference to the milkshakes and the invitation to have fun, I take it as a reasonable and realistic interpretation that this was an incitement, encouragement, or endorsement of physical assault. He lists 3 criminal offenses that he sees in the tweet. So whether or not, you could be cynical and say, well, the UK police especially, they're cucked and whatever. But it's exactly what Frodi was saying earlier. It's exactly what we've been talking about tonight. So that means you're just going to stop? You're just going to stop? No, you have to put your foot on the gas. You have to push forward. And that listener of ours, that great supporter of ours, who I'm in touch with sometimes on email, did so. So I appreciate that. Again, you know who you are. And thank you so much. Now, just in terms of MGTOW, I have no idea how big MGTOW is. I don't know. Sometimes these online movements can perhaps appear larger than they really are and be exaggerated in some ways. There are a lot of threads about what has perverted our natural instincts and our true character of who we are. To just say that it's as simple as, it's your fault, women, I reject that. I'm sorry. I'm not going to have that on my show, or at least I'm not going to stand for that. I only speak for myself. We have plenty of instances in our history where women in the Greek area would do this dance, Poseidon was telling us, of dancing themselves off of a cliff to their death, rather than be taken by the Ottoman Muslims. We have stories of the Cimbri, like this guy Mamirs Brunner, great guy who was recently on Red Ice, telling about how the women roused their men to fight and would actually were there to kill them or kill themselves if they didn't win, because our people, especially Northern Europeans, would rather die free than live as a slave. There are plenty of instances from our lore, from our fairy tales, that have very deep esoteric symbolic meanings about the harmony of male and female and the ways that we complement one another. No one on earth has this kind of harmony between male and female the way that we Europeans do, especially in certain strands of the European story. So it's complicated. I'm not saying that there's no truth to, women have been perverted and their instincts have been taken advantage of in the political sphere, but so have men. There are men who are doing this. There are men who are in positions of power who are doing this. So to send in a super chat and say something that simple, I'm sorry, but I don't support that. Actually, I'm not sorry. What the hell am I saying? I'm not sorry at all. Learn our history a little better, okay?
Yeah, I think that there is obviously a huge problem with the relationship between the sexes, and women today are largely acting as addicts. When they get validation on Instagram or whatever, when they put out pictures of themselves, the validation they get is sort of like what a drug addict gets, the same sort of very similar chemical sort of reactions and stimulations. And my experience with some of these beautiful young women is that they have become so addicted to it that they behave almost like alcoholics. If you ever had an alcoholic in your life, if you've known one, you know that they stop caring about other people as people. Really, they just chase the the alcohol or the drug or whatever. And this sort of artificial stimulation that women get from this social media validation, there are so many of them that are addicted to it like a drug, because they get the same chemical stimulations in the brain as a drug addict gets from this sort of positive reinforcement of that behavior. So they start becoming unfit for relationships, basically, because they stop caring about people in that way, because they have an addict behavior, and that is a huge problem. But you can't really say it's their fault, because it's like all of society is falling apart, is breaking apart, men as well as women, and men are isolating themselves, playing video games rather than having real social interactions, and so it's a huge problem. It's a type of escapism. People are not living in the real world anymore, and it affects both men and women, and we can't really put all the blame on women. But yeah, there are huge problems, and it's difficult to deal with.
Well, let's move on to some of the other things that we wanted to talk about, and related to this will to politics thing. You also talk a lot about thumos, that idea of the passion and how it's been taken away from us, and how ideologies, paradoxically, any ideology that tells you not to have thumos still needs you to have thumos, but they're telling you not to have thumos, and there's kind of a weird back and forth there. But even having said that, there's certainly that fighting spirit, as you've been talking about all of this episode, that's been lost. So I'd like you to share what you have said in speeches about that, and then also get to how and why it's been lost and how we can return to it, find it again.
Right. I'll try to do a better job of remembering what I've said about this.
We'll all help each other figure it out.
Yeah. No. Thumos is basically Plato in the Republic. He divided the human soul into three parts. One is the belly, which is basically our physical needs, and it's the part that everyone has all three parts, but it's one part dominates certain personality types. And the merchant class, and workers and so on, they are driven by their physical needs, I guess, their hunger, and they want to gather money and so on. That is, he symbolically situates that in the belly. And then you have the intellect. Of course, the intellectuals and hopefully wise leaders will be mostly motivated by what's stimulating the intellect and so on. And then you have thumos. And thumos is situated in the chest. That is a thing that we don't really have. We have modern everyday words for hunger and hunger, and I wouldn't say greed, but just those physical needs, and for the intellect. But we don't really have a modern everyday word for thumos, which is fighting spirit, aggression, anger in some sense, and the guardians, the which would be the military or police. That type of class is driven and mostly motivated by that part of the soul, which is the need, the willingness, the eagerness to fight. It's like I don't know if you've seen images of dog fights. A dog that is sort of pulling his leash. He wants to get into the fight because he's eager to get into the fight. Basically, I usually think of that image. That's what's pulling you forward. That you just want. You have sort of, I wouldn't say a bloodlust. That sounds brutal, but yeah, you have an eagerness, a willingness to fight. The problem with the modern world is that the modern world just recognizes the appetites, basically, and somewhat maybe the intellect, because we have intellectuals and so on, pseudo-intellectuals mostly. But everything in modern liberalism and libertarianism and all the modern political ideologies, they all are surrounded by questions of how to best satisfy the appetites. Everything is about how to distribute or redistribute money through taxes and the economy and so on. But they all disregard our sense of fighting spirit and that need in man to fight. And of course, I mean, women have this too, but men to a greater extent, and some men to an even greater extent. And that's just lacking. And that is one of the reasons why this modern world is so fundamentally unfulfilling for so many people, and they just feel that they are empty because you only fulfill the needs of one part of the soul. You don't have the other parts, and you have them, in traditional societies through rituals and through military training and through fighting. And fighting wasn't seen, violence and fighting wasn't seen as an intrinsically evil thing to do. It was just a necessary thing to do. It was just a natural thing of human nature that men fight. Also, men have appetites, men fight, and men have intellect. And they weren't seen as intrinsically bad. And the thing that happens when you lose that, when it's suppressed, people don't really lose it. But now it's seen as something ugly, something nasty, something we should avoid. And it's not promoted because in what the feminists call a patriarchy, all the manly virtues are basically banned and illegal almost. So it's a faux pas to be manly and be guided by the force to fight. And that is the force behind nationalism, to fight for what's yours. It's not, I don't believe it's motivated by this or that theoretical argument or this argument about taxes or economy. Who cares? I don't care. I don't give a damn about that. I want to fight for what's mine. And that's why I'm not, I find, this, some civic nationalists and conservatives are very much attracted by some sort of IQ elitism, that if we only have Asian high IQ people, that's all going to be good because it's good for the economy. No, it's not. No, it's not. Yeah, I don't care about that. I don't want high IQ other people. I want my people. And that's what I fight for, and that's a driving force. And it's in the chest is thumos, which we don't have a word for. We only have words for appetites and such. What happens is that when we suppress those things, I mean, Europeans weren't always weak. It used to be that we dominated the globe. But when we suppress that fighting spirit, it has real world consequences, because the real world isn't, Sex and the City or Seinfeld or everything is a joke and everything is just money and consuming and things like that. What happens is that you lose the fighting spirit, you lose the willingness and the eagerness to fight for your own. But that doesn't mean that outsiders have lost that willingness to fight. And that means that we are conquered by outsiders because we have lost the capacity and the willingness to fight. And that is the consequence. That's the price we have to pay for losing thumos. And the second part of your question is that, dishonestly, the very people who disparage thumos, the very people who joke about it and sort of joke about how silly it is, the fighting men, and the I won't say which ethnicity, but the people who like to joke in Hollywood and so on. They have to use, like I said, dishonestly, they have to use thumos. They have to appeal to thumos to get people to fight for their ideologies. We talked about, I had an episode of Guide to Culture earlier today. We recorded it. And we talked about Game of Thrones, because it was the series finale earlier this week, this Friday, Sunday, I guess, was the last episode of Game of Thrones. And no matter how feminist and politically correct a society becomes, and how much we sort of pretend that thumos doesn't exist or think that thumos is evil, that is what people are attracted to. People are attracted to those types of TV shows. And if the people who shape our ideologies through mass media and so on, if they want us to go along with those things, they have to put the feminist, politically correct nonsense in the mouths of TV characters that radiate thumos, because that's what people are attracted to. You have to sell it through that medium, because if you just put it in some boring economist's mouth on TV, no one will care, because no one cares about that. People are attracted. That's where the energy is. It's in the chest, and it's the same, international communism, Second World War. They talked about the war for the fatherland, basically, and so on. Even the communists had to do that, and it's just a standard thing through all these politically correct but logically incorrect ideologies, is that they lie, they deceive, they're dishonest, and when push comes to shove, they have to appeal to what we say is the truth. They have to appeal to that in order to sell their garbage.
Very well said. Those are some fantastic points. Let me read a couple of super chats really quick, and I'll pass it back to Jared. Noid News, super chatting with $5. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. Writing 30 years of getting raped in court by judges with no rights for the father while being told you don't matter. Let's say MGTOW is the issue. Indeed, we have to correct this imbalance in the courts between men and women. Ross Hunter super chatting with $5. Thank you very much, Ross. And writing, the will to fight requires the understanding that there is more to this life than the individual, the sense of tribe, the sense of a future. Very well written, and thank you for that super chat. Jared, I will pass it back.
Well, this is all building beautifully into more about identity and digging even deeper into who we are. So you have spoken well, Frodi, about how the current paradigm tells people that we're the tabula rasa, right? The blank slate. But meaning really comes from relationships. There's no such thing as an abstract human being. So this is something that I'd really like to dig into. It's definitely a topic that's near and dear to me, something I like to keep turning over, finding new ways to express this or new truths to mine in it, because this is one of the fundamental ways that people out there who are consuming all of this nonsense and garbage in mainstream media and education get tripped up. It's funny how a lot of these people are atheists, but they still seem to think that it's almost like you're a floating soul that just drops into this meat suit, and you could have been anywhere, anytime, anything. It doesn't matter who you were born into, the web of life that you were born into via your family and your extended family and community and whatnot. They just think that it's random and that you can create yourself out of nothing. So why don't we, well, you've spoken a little about that. So why don't we start just with a general, what is your conception of, you spoke about Heidegger's thrownness into the world in one of those speeches. So why don't we begin by just explaining a little of that?
Right. Liberalism, which is, I mean, and now I'm talking about liberalism in a very general, broad, wide sense, as the reigning modern worldview, the modern conception of what the world is in, the West generally, run by America and so on. The view is basically of humans as abstract entities that begin from the same place and then they create themselves. It's like we are atomized individuals. Some philosophers have made a difference, made a distinction between individuals and persons. We can get into that later, but that we start as blank slates and then we write our own history on those blank sheets of paper, basically. The thing is that we're born into this world, and you can choose if you want to be a woman or a man. You can choose if you want to, what race you want to have. You can choose what to become. You can choose where to live. And humans are only units, economical units, and that can be moved over borders for profit. Basically, we can import cheaper labor because that would stimulate our economy in some ways, maybe, and we can sell goods, and that's a conception of what a person is or what an individual is in the modern world. Heidegger had this his concept of Dasein, that which means being there. What he wanted to convey with that is that no being, and we're talking about humans now, we're talking about persons. No person exists, just exists. He exists always in a very specific place, in a very specific context, with a very specific history, belonging to very specific groups. And that's what he meant by Geworfenheit, which means thrownness, that at no point do you exist and then you become what you become. You already, when you start to exist, you are thrown into the world already with relationships and with contexts that you don't choose. When you are born, you're born to a family that you don't choose. You're born into a race that you don't choose. You're born into a social class, economic class, I guess, that you don't choose. You're born with a history that you don't choose. You're born in a geographical location that you don't choose. And what I'm talking about this fundamental sense of alienation in the modern world, that comes from rejecting those very things that make up what we are. It is by trying to, through consumer culture, just become, whatever they market on TV or whatever. It's by embracing our tribe, our family, our location, and cultivating those relationships that we understand who we are. And it's only through those roots that we can find meaning in our lives. We can't find meaning in abstract concepts or just in consuming a lot of, monetary, material stuff. We find meaning, and because the sort of anxiety you feel in your soul when you are alienated, the sort of sense of not belonging is about losing the foothold in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know where you are, and you just feel lost, and you try to fill that big void through consuming things and through alcohol and through drugs or sex or whatever, and that can never fill that hole in your soul. The only thing that can give you meaning and give you a sense of belonging and give you that easiness in the body, and that sense of calm and rootedness is a sense of belonging to who you are. It's a sense of who you are. It's a sense of your context, who you are, your history, and your roots, and your tribe, and that's I think what some of the points that I wanted to get across in that speech, because there are so many people who just feel that they are lost in the mud. They feel that everything is completely meaningless. But you can't find meaning in abstract concepts. You can only find meaning in actual concrete meaning in the here and now, and who you are and your roots.
Jason, did you have something?
Well, I was just thinking as Frodi was speaking, first of all, extremely well said. And that the idea that we are, well, we'll start with the anti-white idea. It serves their agenda with this tabula rasa idea that anyone can be anything, because that is a way that they can then, it's sort of a key to get into the mind and do whatever they want to our people. If anyone can be anything, then that means that people are, as Frodi is saying, fungible. They're like, and I think he uses in the speech the idea of like the $10 or something like this. I think you use as an example that you don't, if you lend someone $10, you don't necessarily need the exact $10 back. And what I'll do is I'll let Frodi speak to that exact, because it was a great comparison that he made in that speech, and it's something that you all should hear. So Frodi, if you would please.
Yes, I tried to convey that point by a sort of philosophical thought experiment. And basically, in the way we treat humans in the liberal world and in the sort of economical world, it is as fungible units. And fungible means interchangeable. It's basically, it's used, the word is used for money and for if I buy grain from you, it's fungible. It is, it's the quantity that counts. Mm-hmm. So if I borrow $10 from you, and you say that, and I give you $10 back, and you complain because no, those were not the very $10 that I gave you. Those are just some other $10. You would be insane to complain about that, because the very function of money is to be interchangeable. That's the point of money. That's why money exists. Mm-hmm. So you give me $10 and I give you $10. That's the quantity, not the token unit. So, but if on the other hand, I babysit your child, and I just give you any random child back, and I say, well, well, you gave me one child, and I babysat, and I helped you out, and now I give you one child back. So what's the problem? And you say, no, I want my child. You see, that's because in that case, I would of course be insane. But that is how the modern world works. Mm-hmm. It's the reign of quantity, you see. The problem is that there is this saying that about human that all are about human value. Every human has the same value or whatever. Well, no, they don't. Humans don't have the same value, and that is because if they had the same value, they would have no value. The point is that the value of humans is determined by their very relation to the person they have a value for. And therefore, if you have a child, that child is hopefully, if you're a sane person, if you're not clinically insane, that child has an infinitely higher value than a random stranger would have. Because otherwise you wouldn't have any survival capacity, evolutionarily or whatever. Because the value of that child for you is determined by that child's or that person's relationship to you. In the same way, I hope, if you're not a horrible husband, I hope that your wife is worth more to you than a random person on the other side of the planet, because otherwise you would be an evil person. And now the insanity of the modern world is to try to market this idea that everyone is just the same and everyone is just interchangeable. No, they're not, because it doesn't work that way with humans. We have value to each other, and we have value to ourselves through our relations. And those relations are not things that we choose. Those are things that we are born with and that develop, organically throughout our lives, through our life history and so on. But I mean, that's the insanity of trying to say that men can become women by cutting off their penis. No, they can't, and that's that's the major flaw. If anyone was wondering what the major flaw of the argument of the feminists these days, who try to have very casual abortions, when they claim that the child in their womb is a burglar, they compare it to a burglar. No, it isn't. Or a parasite. They call it a parasite because it's like, well, they need me to live, I don't need them to live. They use those arguments, feminists do. Well, no, they don't, because you don't have that relationship. You have created that child. Therefore, you have a different relationship to that child than you have to a burglar breaking into your house, or to a parasite sucking your blood or something like that. And those are the very fundamental things we have to understand if we want to have meaningful and healthy and good societies.
Yeah, Frodi, your example of the transgenders, you said very well in your speech that this is the biological expression of something that has been on the march for a long time, right? And it's just trickling down from theories at first and ideas into more and more tangible things. And so the most gross bodily tangible thing is your own corporal existence, your body, your genitals. So it's just in a strange way, strange to invoke the word logic here, but if you follow from the source, it is the logical progression from these ideas into things more and more tangible and physical, this idea that everything can be the same. And in my understanding, it's the lore, the siren song of all of this is this idea of universalism, because it seems very kumbaya on the surface, and it seems very noble to some people, because they're trying to take this, and again, it's funny, sometimes even atheistic people take these terms that I would imagine you're putting yourself in the mind's eye of the most transcendent God behind the gods, Brahman level, whatever you want to say, that from that perspective, looking at humanity, let's say, or all of creation, then there is, if it's all of your creation, or there's some kind of fundamental baseline love there, then you're putting yourself in that transcendent perspective and saying that all human beings have this a value, okay? And from that perspective, you can even make an argument, you can make philosophical, metaphysical arguments that that's the case. But from the ground level, from being a human being, from looking out through my eyes into the world as Jared, and you look out through your perspective as Frodi and Jason as Jason, to be human means to have limits. That is the beauty of being human. And as you so well said, everything is about our relationships. So while at first blush, it sounds to some people who haven't thought this through that it's actually, quote unquote, very evolved, very spiritual, whatever the terminology is, to have this kind of universalistic, everyone is the same, there's a spark of the divine in everyone, however you want to say it, it sounds so enticing on a certain level. It's actually evil. I will go so far as to use the word evil because it is anti-life. To make yourself an abstract human being, there is no such thing, but to attempt to make yourself an abstract human being and to cut yourself off from all of these relations and all of these things that bind you in the good way, bind you in your web of space and time and give you a locus point, you're destroying yourself. That is anti-life. And that is why I use that word evil. I'd like to, if both of you gentlemen will indulge me, I'd like to read something for a moment about the runes. We mentioned the runes earlier in that story, potential story about Sweden. Hopefully it doesn't go further. It was just some wacky idea. But it struck me to read this because it is going to build on what we're saying, but it's going to add another layer. And Frodi, I would love to hear your thoughts on this because, of course, it connects what we're saying to something you began with when you were telling us about your childhood growing up, and that's this connection to your folk heritage. And it speaks to something near and dear to me as well, because I often say that it is our modern consciousness is divided. It's cut up. It's not holistic. And that is one of the root causes of all of these crazy things that we talk about. And when we're talking about men and women before, how things get perverted, or I was saying last week how at the end of our stream with Porridge, how the romantic and the scientific, sometimes you can go too far to one side or the other. Our logic, our ability to measure things is an amazing gift that we need to use. But if we fall too far into that and we don't balance it, then we get into this, what I was just saying, this tyranny of abstractions and all of the things that can trip us up by being too abstract. So this is from an essay by Colin Cleary, who is one of the most profound writers on the runes and on our traditions, and I really recommend everyone checking him out. And no matter your religious background, if you're of European descent, he really does give a key into how our people thought in a more natural, pre-modern, pre-industrial time, and something that I believe is humming underneath the surface, and that we can get back to and figure out how to use for our times. So I will read this, and then I'd like your thoughts, both of your thoughts, on the consciousness, the different kind of consciousness and approach to life that this is talking about. So this is Colin Cleary on the runes, and he's talking about basically living with a holistic mind versus that only logical, philosophical mind. And he's using the term imaginative universals. He's saying the runes, I know that sounds like a big word, but you'll understand what he means, that the runes, the symbols, are imaginative universals. So he goes, an example of an imaginative universal in action would be when a bard sings the praises of a brave man and says, he is Sigurd. In this case, one individual, Sigurd, is taken to stand for the characteristic of being brave. An intelligible universal, on the other hand, would say bravery. It is an abstract concept abstracted from a number of examples of brave individuals. Instead of saying, he is Sigurd, the bard could have said, this man exhibits bravery. But then, of course, the bard would not be a bard, but a philosopher. The runes are clearly a system of such imaginative universals in which certain items found in the life world of our ancestors are taken as exemplars of various fundamental features of existence. The mentality that thinks in terms of imaginative universals is often called mythopoetic. And it is obvious how imaginative universals form the basis both of myth and poetry. The mythopoetic mind is one that seems very alien to most of us, who are accustomed to dealing almost exclusively with intelligible, abstract universals. The mythopoetic mentality itself is made possible by something more fundamental. a radically different orientation toward the world. It involves seeing the world around us as laden with symbolic meaning. In other words, the mythopoetic mind reads the world as we would read a story or a poem, looking for the symbolic meaning coded into it by the author. The mythopoetic mind of our ancestors, in essence, saw the world as a text to be interpreted. Our philosophical interpretation of the runes is something we engage in simply because the meaning of the runes is no longer immediately apparent to us as it was to our ancestors. So this is the difference between getting a poem and just getting it, or hearing a piece of music and just being moved by it in the moment, versus having to sit there, study it, analyze it, read reference articles about it all night, and then have your opinion formed for you in philosophy. This doesn't mean that you don't need philosophy, but that you can understand more holistically in the moment. So I have lived this way, and I was wired this way as a kid. And I'm wondering if some people in our movement are maybe like this, where there's an opportunity cost because the world doesn't think, most of the world doesn't think this way. And maybe some of us feel like we're out of place because for some reason I did see, I know what he means. And I'm curious what you guys think of reading the world, of seeing meaning in things. Everything laden with meaning. That's not how most people live. Everything is abstracted. Everything is too intellectual. And I'm a guy who gets up here and talks, and I use my intellect and I use language. But the basis of this for me is something more in the soul. You know, the words I use and the intellect I wrap it in when I do these shows or I write articles, that's just the way to encapsulate it. It's coming from something perhaps in the chest, as Frodi was saying before. So I'm curious how that hits you, Frodi, the runes, and Colin Cleary's explanation of it.
Yeah, Colin Cleary is also one of my favorite writers, and the runes are dear to me, of course. And I think it's very, tightly intertwined with what we talked about just a moment ago. And what you said about things being laden with meaning. That is because you're living in them in a way that it was part of our ancestors' immediate surroundings and their frame of reference. And the way for things to lose meaning is to take a step back and make them into sort of to cut off your relationship to them and make them just an abstract object of study. And what you talked about earlier about some people thinking it a virtue to sort of be detached from the world around them and from the people around them, because that's a sort of an enlightened mindset. I guess in some Buddhist holy man might think that he's very enlightened because he sees through the veil of Maya, and he can see that everything is the same, and I'm not distinct from you. It's just an illusion that I'm distinct from you, and so on. Well, that might be fun as a thought experiment, but if your mother has that relationship to you, you will grow up with a brain damage, because you will not get the interpersonal interaction, the stimuli that's needed for the brain to develop the right way, and so you'll become, in essence, a sociopath, psychopath. You will not be able to relate to other humans. So yeah, I mean, these things are interesting as thought experiments, but real humans need real connections and real relationships, and they need to live in a real place with real roots. And what you said about this mythopoetic sort of relationship to their own lore and their own history and their own runes. The question of meaning would be incomprehensible to them. And it of course pains me that we have to even talk about these things, because they should be obvious, but they aren't. So we have to take the huge detour around philosophy to get back to the essence and the self-evident.
Very well said, brother. Let me read a couple of super chats and we're going to get some final thoughts as we get ready to tap out here on another great episode. We'll absolutely have to have you back. I realize it's late for you, Frodi, and after so many shows, you probably are ready to hit the sack. Well, but we have a super chat from Ross Hunter again, super chatting with $5. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. Writing, look into the myth of Dionysus and his followers, which were called Medes. I think you will find it relevant to the discussion. Thank you very much for that. We have DMAC super chatting with $15 and writing, high noon, July 6th, Freedom Plaza, DC. Alt-light newbies hit the street in enemy territory in a hot zone. It's going to be hot because it's DC in July, I'll tell you that much. It will be fun to watch. Who's your daddy? Writes DMAC. Well, that's just right down the road for me. I might have to head out there with a video camera and get some video and some conversations with some of these alt-light types. That would be amusing. We have Sean Alexander writing with $4.99. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. How could gentlemen such as yourselves be perceived as hateful individuals? Well, we could only be perceived as hateful by anti-white hateful individuals. We are standing between them and the harm that they would like to inflict on our people, our white babies, and therefore they will call us every slur that they can imagine. But just remember, folks, don't fear the slur. Don't fear the smear. The anti-whites will call you all the names in the book. Our ancestors have fought through a lot worse. Remember that every time you become afraid of the name you might be called and what your neighbor might think of you, or what the waiter who you will never see again in your life might think of you. Reflect on those times that we had ancestors who fought shoeless in the cold, who fought in grueling situations, who died and struggled in scenarios that are so ghastly and grim that it is incomprehensible to our hothouse minds today. If they could get through that so that you could be here this day, then you will endure someone thinking bad of you so that the generations who come later will survive. So some final thoughts from our great guest today. If you could let us know what you are working on and what you will be working on next and where our people can find you, please do, Frodi.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me again. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope to talk to you again very soon. I'm going to Stockholm this weekend, and I'm going to participate in a panel discussion there. And I'm definitely going to have more Scandza forums this year. I have no set date yet, and probably lots of other events as well around Europe. I mean, we're a big family of people doing these things, and we are, we are close to each other, and we travel around and meet each other, and we build these networks. And like you said, if you're afraid of what someone might think of you, you just might need to have more like-minded people around you, so you get the self-confidence to do whatever you believe in. If you want to stay in touch with me, you can send me an email to info@scandzaforum.com. That's probably the easiest way right now. So thank you guys for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure, although I've been slightly tired, so I hope my performance hasn't been too disappointing.
No, it's been remarkable as always. And Jared said it earlier when he spoke to being able to speak foreign languages. We both look on in wonder and awe that foreign speakers are able to speak as eloquently as you, my good friend. Jared, where can folks find you? What are you working on? What will you be working on next?
Well, I'm happy to say the Countercurrent site is back up, apparently. So I just shared in the chat again my recent Uberfolk review. So if you'd like to go read that, it's another piece, a new piece I have on countercurrents. And everything I do goes through thegreatorder.com. So my articles, as well as these live streams that you see, the videos, they're all posted there. So if you just need to see or want to see a running tally of what I'm doing, it's in the posts. I have other things on the pages, but essentially I tried to make it so that it's a hub for all of my activities, how you can find out a little more what I'm about. If you liked some of the philosophy tonight, I have these 9 foundations articles that goes much deeper into what my frame has been and why I kind of started. And there's a lot there, a lot on the site, ways to contact, all the social media. So please do keep an eye on that. Jason and I, of course, announce these new shows for the after party and anything else that we do on our social media accounts. Although I do encourage people to sign up for the email list as well, because that's a much more direct way to stay in touch. We are somewhat at the mercy of these social media platforms, but I have a pretty robustly protected website. It is hosted outside of the EU and outside of the United States and Iceland. If you're making a website yourself, you can click on my link to the Icelandic company I use, and I get a little bit of that. It's another way to support. I'm an affiliate of that company. Orange Website is its name. But yeah, Frodi, it was wonderful to speak to you again. I know we've spoken before, but this is the first time we've really had you formally on the after party to really dig into what you're about. And I know we have a lot more to talk about. So I look forward to speaking more. Hopefully one day we will break bread, or maybe not eat bread. Jason doesn't eat bread, but we'll eat meat. We'll break meat. We'll cut meat together and meet in real life. But thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for being on. You were on 3 today. So you were on us. You were on Ramsey Paul.
No, I was on the Countercurrents radio. We recorded an episode of Guide to Culture as well, and now I'm on this.
Yeah, we didn't really get to talk about that. We know that you're attracted to analyzing TV and film. So do everyone please check out Guide to Culture, because Frodi's able to take our perspectives and interpret film and TV out there. So it's something very useful. And we'll have to have you back to speak a little about what you've learned from doing all of that. But yes, thank you again. We'll speak soon, and I'll give it to Jason to take us out for now. And thank you to, of course, all the chat, and again to Syrup. This one was for your dad. Hope we did well in his honor.
Indeed, sir. Folks, if you can, first of all, if you have not subscribed to these good men's platform, please do. They're doing great work for us. If you can financially support them, if that's within your means, please do so as well. I would deeply appreciate it. I will be perhaps doing a going free on Saturday, so look for that as a potential. If also, let me see, I do want to mention we did have one other super chat. It was Dino, that's right. Super chatting $1 and writing, if you believe you are immortal, then you made the choice of which parents you would take on before taking on your body. Everything is a choice within the purpose. Thank you very much, Dino, for that super chat. And that was by way of the familiar alternative. I want to give a big thanks to Jared, just spotlight him for a moment for all the hard work that he does to make sure that these TAP episodes are instructive, educational, edifying, and entertaining for you all. So a big thanks to Jared George of the Great Order for all that he does to make these a huge success. A big thank you to our redoubtable moderators. I know, of course, we had Syrup moderating for us today. If Phoenix Fire did any moderating as well, I want to thank you for your service there as well. Again, I'll echo what Jared said. This episode was in Papa Syrup's honor. And I, too, hope that we did him a great respect by doing so. Let me give a few shout-outs to some people I saw in the chat. I saw Caesar in the chat. Good to see you. I saw Rick. Resurrection Jose. I saw him in the chat today. Bon Rebel was in the chat. And our good friend Underhill was also in the chat. A big thank you to everyone watching live and in the replay. A big heartfelt thanks to everyone who super chatted and discussed their ideas, shared their thoughts in the live stream today, and everyone who will be sharing their thoughts in the thread in the coming days and weeks after this episode. It is a great honor to be able to serve the cause of white well-being with all of you. You are the best of our community in serving white well-being in the white positive sphere in general, and you are the best of your families. I salute you all, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.